Hello guys, welcome to Infinite Stories. Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Let's get into the story. Jennifer's marriage to Andy was a dream that turned sour over time. Andy was the embodiment of charm, handsome, successful, and the type of man who could light up a room with his smile. When they first met, Jennifer believed he was her soulmate, a man who would protect and cherish her forever. Their wedding was nothing short of magical, with heartfelt vows and promises of eternal love. But as the honeymoon phase faded, Jennifer began to notice subtle changes. Andy, once attentive and loving, grew distant. His phone became an extension of his hand, buzzing at odd hours with text messages he never bothered to explain. His late-night business calls, once rare, became the norm, and his excuses for extended trips began to feel rehearsed. Jennifer often dismissed her suspicions, convincing herself that she was overthinking. After all, Andy still brought her flowers and kissed her forehead every morning. But beneath his gestures lay a truth Jennifer couldn't ignore. Lipstick stains on his shirt collars, faint traces of perfume that wasn't hers, and whispers of women she didn't know haunted her thoughts. Confronting Andy was futile. His laugh would disarm her, and he always brushed off her accusations with jokes or promises to do better. Jennifer turned to prayer, spending sleepless nights on her knees, begging God to restore her husband's faithfulness. Her desperation led her to confide in her pastor, who encouraged her to stay steadfast and patient. However, every promise Andy made seemed fleeting, like rain in a dry season, leaving Jennifer feeling emptier each time. Despite her efforts to save her marriage, she found herself spiraling into a void of hopelessness, unsure of how long she could endure this torment. Frustrated and broken, Jennifer turned to her best friend, Sophia, for solace. Sophia was the kind of friend who always knew how to make her laugh, even in her darkest moments. They met at a cozy cafe one evening, and Jennifer poured her heart out. She spoke of Andy's infidelities, her prayers, and how she felt like she was fighting a losing battle. Sophia, who had heard it all before, sighed deeply before offering advice. "You've done everything, Jen. Maybe it's time to consider unconventional methods." Jennifer frowned, confused. Sophia hesitated before continuing. "You know, like a herbalist or something." Her tone was light, almost joking, but the idea planted a seed in Jennifer's mind. At first, Jennifer dismissed the suggestion as absurd. But as the weeks turned into months, Andy's behavior only worsened. He came home late, smelling of alcohol and unfamiliar perfume, his excuses growing flimsier with each passing day. Jennifer's heart felt like it was shattering piece by piece. Desperate for a solution, she called Sophia one evening. "Remember what you told me about seeing a herbalist?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sophia was silent for a moment before replying, "Jen, I was joking. You don't need to go that far." But Jennifer was resolute. She demanded Sophia give her the information, ignoring her friend's warnings about the risks involved. "I can't keep living like this," Jennifer said, her voice filled with a mix of pain and determination. Despite Sophia's protests, Jennifer made up her mind. She would do whatever it took to save her marriage, even if it meant venturing into the unknown. The next day, Jennifer felt a mix of dread and resolve as she prepared to visit the herbalist. The information Sophia reluctantly shared included vague directions to a remote village and the name of the man she needed to find, Baba. Jennifer hesitated, questioning her decision, but the pain of Andy's betrayals pushed her forward. She couldn't spend another sleepless night crying over her husband's infidelity. She dressed cautiously, choosing plain clothes and comfortable shoes, aware that the journey would be long and difficult. Her hands trembled as she packed her bag, slipping in a flashlight and a bottle of water. She whispered a quick prayer, not for forgiveness, but for strength. As Jennifer approached the outskirts of the village, a sense of unease settled over her. The road was rugged and flanked by dense bushes, the kind of place where silence seemed louder than any sound. Her heart pounded as she followed the directions, feeling the shadows of the forest closing in. When she finally reached the shrine, It was just as Sophia had described, an eerie structure surrounded by wooden carvings and flickering lanterns. Baba emerged from the darkness, his eyes piercing, his face painted with white patterns that made him look otherworldly. "Why have you come, daughter of men?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. Jennifer hesitated, swallowing hard. "I need your help," she managed to say, her voice barely audible. Baba nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Help comes with a price. Are you prepared to pay it?" Baba's presence was both terrifying and magnetic. His movements were deliberate, his voice a mixture of authority and mystery. He waved his hand, and a gust of cold wind seemed to sweep through the shrine, sending chills down Jennifer's spine. "You seek to bind your husband's desires," he said, as if reading her mind. Jennifer's lips parted in shock. She hadn't uttered a word about her problem, yet he knew. "Be warned," Baba continued, his voice laced with a dark finality, "this path is not without consequences. Once the charm is done, it cannot be undone." Jennifer shivered but stood her ground. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said firmly. Baba studied her for a long moment before handing her a small, ornately carved wooden box. "Place this under his pillow for 7 nights, he instructed. "On the 7th night, you must throw the box into the river. Only then will the spell be complete. Fail to follow my instructions, and the consequences will be far worse than you can imagine." Jennifer nodded, clutching the box tightly. As she turned to leave, Baba's voice echoed behind her. "The choice is yours, daughter of man. But remember, every choice carries its burden." The weight of his words followed her all the way home, but Jennifer's resolve didn't waver. Back at home, Jennifer waited for Andy to fall asleep before taking the first step in Baba's ritual. Her hands shook as she placed the charm box beneath his pillow. The act felt real, as if she were crossing an invisible line she could never return from. Andy snored softly, oblivious to the storm raging inside his wife's heart. Jennifer sat on the edge of the bed, staring at him. She wondered how they had come to this, how the man she once adored had driven her to seek solutions in the supernatural. But instead of guilt, she felt a flicker of hope. If this worked, they could finally have the marriage she'd always dreamed of. The next morning, Jennifer watched Andy closely, searching for any signs of change. He was his usual self, rushing through breakfast and cracking jokes about his busy day ahead. She felt a pang of disappointment but reminded herself that the ritual required 7 nights. Each night, she repeated the process, her anxiety growing with every passing day. By the 7th night, she was desperate for the ritual to work. As she stood by the riverbank, clutching the box, a sense of foreboding washed over her. "Let this be the answer," she whispered, tossing the box into the murky water. She turned away without looking back, convinced she had done everything she could to save her marriage. Unknown to Jennifer, the ritual she had completed was doomed from the start. Andy's curse was older and stronger than anything Baba's charm could counter. Born into a polygamous family, Andy was the only surviving child of his mother, Vivian. She was the youngest and most beautiful of her husband's wives, a fact that made her the target of constant jealousy and hatred. The older wives plotted to destroy her children, killing 5 of them before turning their sights on Andy. Vivian, desperate to protect her last child, sought help from her own mother. Andy's grandmother was a powerful woman who fortified him with spiritual protections that no charm could penetrate. Andy grew up unaware of the depth of his mother's sacrifices. His charm and charisma were gifts inherited from her, but they also carried a darkness he couldn't shake. His inability to remain faithful wasn't just a flaw. It was a curse born of the hatred that had surrounded him as a child. When Jennifer's charm failed to bind him, its power turned inward, seeking the closest soul to consume. Jennifer had unknowingly unleashed a force she couldn't control, one that would bring her face to face with consequences she was unprepared to face. In the days following the ritual, Jennifer noticed subtle changes in Andy. His behavior seemed unaffected by the charm. If anything, he grew bolder. He spent even less time at home, his excuses more dismissive than ever. Jennifer's frustration turned to fear as she began experiencing strange phenomena. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of her vision, and she often felt a chilling presence in the house. Her nights became restless, filled with vivid nightmares of drowning in a dark, endless river. Sophia grew worried about Jennifer's deteriorating state. When Jennifer finally confided in her about the ritual, Sophia was horrified. "I warned you, Jen," she said, her voice trembling. "I told you there would be consequences." Jennifer broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't know what else to do," she admitted. Sophia insisted they go back to Baba, hoping he could undo the spell. But when they returned to the shrine, Baba was nowhere to be found. The shrine looked abandoned, as if no one had been there in years. Jennifer's heart sank. She realized too late that she had made a grave mistake, one that could not be undone. Jennifer's life began spiraling out of control. The shadows in her home grew darker, more pronounced, until she could no longer dismiss them as tricks of her mind. Objects moved on their own. Lights flickered without warning. One night, she woke to find herself unable to breathe, as if an invisible hand were choking her. Gasping for air, she scrambled out of bed, only to find Andy sleeping peacefully beside her. She stared at him, her fear giving way to anger. "This is your fault," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You did this to us." Desperate, Jennifer turned to her pastor once again, confessing everything. His reaction was one of shock and dismay. "You've opened a door that should never have been opened," he told her gravely. "Only God can help you now." Jennifer threw herself into prayer, fasting and begging for forgiveness. But the darkness she had unleashed was relentless. It seemed to feed on her fear and despair, growing stronger with each passing day. She felt as though she were losing her mind, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Sophia, determined to help her friend, began digging into Andy's past. She spoke to older relatives, piecing together the story of his childhood and the curse that had followed him into adulthood. When she told Jennifer what she had learned, Jennifer was stunned. The realization that Andy's infidelity wasn't entirely his fault filled her with a mix of guilt and helplessness. But the knowledge also confirmed her worst fear: the charm she had used was powerless against him. Jennifer confronted Andy, hoping he would listen. She told him everything, about Baba, the charm, and the curse that had plagued their lives. Andy's reaction was one of disbelief and anger. "You think this is my fault?" he shouted. "You went to some witch doctor and now you want to blame me?" His words cut deep, but Jennifer knew she couldn't back down. "I was trying to save us," she said, her voice breaking. "But I made everything worse." Andy stormed out, leaving Jennifer alone with the suffocating darkness that had become her reality. The darkness that haunted Jennifer grew unbearable. She could no longer distinguish between reality and hallucination. Her reflection in the mirror seemed to sneer at her. Voices whispered her name in the dead of night. She stopped eating, stopped praying, and stopped leaving the house. Sophia tried to intervene, but Jennifer pushed her away, consumed by guilt and fear. One fateful night, Jennifer's torment reached its peak. The shadows in her home coalesced into a form, a terrifying figure with hollow eyes and a voice that dripped with malice. "You were warned," it said, its voice echoing in her mind. "Now you will pay the price." Jennifer screamed, but no one came to her aid. When morning came, Sophia found her lifeless body sprawled on the floor, her face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. The curse had claimed its victim, leaving behind a broken man and a grieving friend to piece together the shards of her tragic story. Jennifer's funeral was a somber affair, attended by close friends and family. Her tragic death left many in shock, but few understood the true horror behind her demise. Andy stood beside her coffin, his face a mask of sorrow and guilt. For all his flaws, he hadn't imagined his actions would drive his wife to such extremes. Yet, there he was, burying the woman who had once been his everything. The whispers at the funeral cut through his thoughts, People speculating about Jennifer's sudden death and the toll their troubled marriage must have taken on her. Andy clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath his grief. Sophia, seated at the back of the church, couldn't bring herself to look at the casket. Her guilt was overwhelming. Had she not joked about the herbalist, Jennifer might still be alive. Tears streamed down her face as she silently vowed to uncover the truth about what really happened. After the burial, Sophia approached Andy. "We need to talk," she said firmly. Andy, still in shock, nodded, agreeing to meet her the next day. What Sophia didn't tell him was that she had plans to revisit Baba's shrine. She had to know why the ritual had failed, and why it had cost Jennifer her life. Sophia embarked on the journey to Baba's shrine with a sense of foreboding. The path felt more desolate than she remembered from Jennifer's description. The forest seemed alive, whispering secrets she couldn't understand. When she reached the shrine, it appeared abandoned, much like the last time she and Jennifer had visited. Still, Sophia called out for Baba, her voice trembling. "I know you're here," she shouted. "I need answers." Her persistence paid off. Baba emerged from the shadows, his face as intimidating as ever. "You've come for answers, but do you truly wish to hear them?" he asked, his tone ominous. Sophia nodded, steeling herself. Baba sighed deeply and began to explain. "The charm was never meant to work on him. Your friend's husband carried a curse older and stronger than any spell I could cast. His spirit was fortified by forces even I dare not challenge." Sophia's heart sank as Baba continued. "When the charm failed, its power turned inward, consuming the one who invoked it. That was the consequence I warned her about." Baba's words filled Sophia with dread, but she wasn't ready to leave. "Is there any way to break this curse?" she asked desperately. Baba stared at her for a long moment before replying, only by unraveling the source. Determined to free Andy from his curse, Sophia began researching his family history. She reached out to his relatives, piecing together the fragmented stories of his childhood. The truth she uncovered was more horrifying than she had anticipated. Andy's father had been a polygamist with 6 wives, all vying for his attention and affection. The jealousy among the wives had turned to hatred, and that hatred had led to bloodshed. 5 of Vivian's children were murdered by the other wives, leaving only Andy as her surviving child. Vivian, desperate to protect her son, had sought the help of her mother, who was known as a powerful spiritualist in their village. Andy's grandmother performed a ritual to shield him from harm, fortifying his spirit against any external attacks. But the ritual came with unintended consequences. It made Andy impervious to love and loyalty, binding him to a cycle of infidelity and emotional detachment. As Sophia delved deeper into the story, she realized that Jennifer's tragic end was only one chapter in a much larger, darker tale. The curse that had protected Andy had also doomed everyone who loved him. Armed with the truth, Sophia decided to confront Andy. She found him at his office, buried in work as if trying to escape the weight of Jennifer's death. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm. Andy looked up, surprised by her presence. "About what?" he asked, his tone weary. Sophia didn't mince words. She told him everything she had discovered about his family's curse, leaving no detail untouched. Andy listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, Andy leaned back in his chair, a bitter smile on his lips. "So, you're saying my entire life has been a lie?" he asked. Sophia nodded. "Not a lie, but a tragedy," she replied. "Jennifer loved you, and she died trying to fix something that wasn't her fault." Andy's composure cracked. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with emotion. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia placed a hand on his shoulder. "We find a way to break the curse. For Jennifer, and for yourself." Sophia and Andy began their quest to break the curse, starting with a visit to his grandmother's old village. The journey was fraught with tension, as Andy wrestled with feelings of guilt and resentment. He had always dismissed his past as irrelevant, but now he realized how deeply it had shaped his life. When they arrived, the villagers were wary of their questions. Andy's grandmother had been a revered figure, but her actions had left a lasting mark on the community. After much persuasion, an elderly woman agreed to speak with them. She revealed that Andy's grandmother had performed the ritual out of desperation, using a forbidden spell that bound his soul to a protective spirit. The only way to break the curse, she explained, is to release the spirit that guards him. But be warned, it will not go quietly. Andy and Sophia exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the journey ahead would be dangerous, but they also knew they couldn't turn back. To break the curse, Andy and Sophia had to perform a counter-ritual that would sever his bond with the protective spirit. The elderly woman provided them with instructions, warning them of the risks involved. "This spirit has been with you since birth," she told Andy. "It will not let go without a fight." Andy nodded, determined to free himself from the chains of his past. The ritual required specific ingredients, including rare herbs and a ceremonial blade. Gathering these items took weeks, during which Andy began to reflect on his life. He thought about Jennifer and how much she had endured for him. Guilt consumed him, but it also fueled his resolve. When the day of the ritual arrived, Andy and Sophia stood in a sacred grove, surrounded by flickering candles. As the elderly woman began chanting, the air grew thick with tension. Andy felt a sudden pressure in his chest, as if something inside him was trying to resist. As the ritual progressed, Andy's body convulsed, and he collapsed to the ground. Sophia rushed to his side, but the elderly woman held her back. "He must face this alone," she said firmly. Andy's mind was a whirlwind of memories and emotions. He saw his childhood flash before him, the jealousy of his father's wives, the fear in his mother's eyes, and the love she had fought so hard to protect. The protective spirit that had shielded him for so long now appeared as a towering figure of shadow and light. "You cannot survive without me," it said, its voice booming. Andy clenched his fists, summoning every ounce of courage he had. "I don't need you anymore," he replied, his voice steady. The spirit roared, its form growing more menacing. But Andy stood his ground, determined to reclaim his life. The battle between Andy and the spirit was fierce, both physically and mentally. Andy felt as though he were being torn apart, but he refused to give in. He thought of Jennifer, her smile, and the love she had shown him despite his flaws. That love gave him the strength to push back against the spirit's hold. "You don't control me," he shouted. "I choose my own path." With one final surge of willpower, Andy severed the connection. The spirit let out a deafening scream before vanishing into the ether. The candles around them flickered and died, plunging the grove into darkness. Andy collapsed, exhausted but free. Sophia rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she whispered. "It's over." Andy nodded weakly, a sense of peace washing over him for the first time in his life. In the days following the ritual, Andy began to feel like a new man. The weight that had burdened him for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. He apologized to everyone he had wronged, starting with Sophia. "You stood by me when I didn't deserve it," he told her. "Thank you." Sophia smiled, relieved to see him finally taking responsibility for his actions. Andy also took steps to honor Jennifer's memory. He donated to organizations that supported women in abusive relationships and started a foundation in her name. Though he could never undo the pain he had caused, he vowed to live a life that would make her proud. For the first time, Andy felt a sense of hope, a belief that he could be better, not just for himself, but for the people who cared about him. Though the curse had been lifted, Andy knew his journey was far from over. The scars of his past would take time to heal, and he would need to work hard to rebuild his life. But he was no longer alone. Sophia remained by his side, a constant source of support and encouragement. Together, they looked to the future with cautious optimism. As Andy stood at Jennifer's grave one last time, he placed a bouquet of her favorite flowers on the headstone. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'll carry your love with me, always." He walked away, feeling a newfound sense of freedom. The road ahead was uncertain, but Andy was ready to face it, one step at a time. Though Andy had broken the curse, remnants of his past continued to haunt him. Nightmares plagued his sleep, vivid images of Jennifer's tear-streaked face and the shadowy spirit he had banished. Each dream left him gasping for air, drenched in sweat. During the day, he immersed himself in work, trying to drown the memories in productivity. Yet, reminders of Jennifer lingered everywhere, in the scent of her favorite perfume lingering in their home, in the small garden she had lovingly tended, and in the photographs of happier times that he couldn't bear to take down. Sophia noticed his struggles and urged him to confront his pain instead of suppressing it. "Running from this won't help you heal," she told him. Andy reluctantly agreed to see a therapist, someone who could help him unpack years of unresolved trauma. During his sessions, he opened up about his childhood, his mother's suffering, and the guilt that consumed him over Jennifer's death. The therapist helped him see that while he couldn't change the past, he could learn from it and strive to make amends in meaningful ways. Slowly, Andy began to embrace this journey of self-discovery, though the path was far from easy. One afternoon, as Andy sorted through a pile of old mail, he stumbled upon a letter addressed to Jennifer. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and his curiosity piqued. Carefully, he opened the envelope and began reading. The letter was from a woman named Vivian, his estranged mother. In it, she expressed regret for her absence in Jennifer's life and mentioned the hope she had for reconciliation one day. Vivian wrote about the struggles she had faced after leaving Andy in his grandmother's care and how she had longed to see him again but feared rejection. The letter was dated just 2 weeks before Jennifer's death, leaving Andy reeling. His mother had tried to reconnect with him through Jennifer, but the chance was gone. Andy's emotions swung between anger, regret, and longing. He shared the letter with Sophia, who encouraged him to reach out to his mother. "You may not get another chance," she said gently. Despite his reservations, Andy decided to find Vivian and hear her story. He realized that understanding his past fully was crucial to moving forward. Finding Vivian proved to be a daunting task. Andy hired a private investigator, who tracked her to a small, rural town where she lived a modest life. When Andy arrived unannounced, he found a frail woman tending to a small vegetable garden outside a dilapidated house. Her eyes widened when she saw him, and tears streamed down her face. "Andy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've grown so much." Their initial meeting was tense, filled with long silences and unspoken questions. But as they sat together, Vivian began to share her story. She explained how she had been forced to flee the polygamous household to protect herself after the other wives turned on her. Leaving Andy behind had been the most painful decision of her life, but she believed it was the only way to save him. Listening to her, Andy felt a mixture of sadness and understanding. He realized that, like Jennifer, his mother had made unimaginable sacrifices out of love for him. Their reunion marked the beginning of a tentative but hopeful relationship, one that would take time to rebuild. Over the next few weeks, Andy and Vivian worked to bridge the gap of lost years. She shared stories about his childhood, painting a picture of the happy moments they had before their lives were torn apart. Andy, in turn, opened up about his struggles, his failed marriage, and the curse that had loomed over his life. Vivian listened with a mix of heartbreak and pride, marveling at how her son had endured so much and still found the strength to seek redemption. Their conversations brought Andy a sense of closure he hadn't known he needed. For the first time, he began to see himself not just as the product of a troubled past but as someone capable of change and growth. He even invited Vivian to visit the foundation he had created in Jennifer's memory, a gesture that symbolized his commitment to honoring the woman who had loved him unconditionally. Vivian's presence became a source of comfort, a reminder that healing was possible, even in the face of profound loss. Despite the progress Andy was making, the shadows of regret continued to linger. He often found himself revisiting the choices he had made, questioning whether he could ever truly atone for the pain he had caused Jennifer. One night, as he stood by the river where Jennifer had cast the charm, he was overwhelmed by a sense of her presence. The water seemed to whisper her name, and he fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Sophia found him there hours later, lost in his grief. "Jennifer wouldn't want you to punish yourself like this," she said softly. "She believed in you, even when you couldn't see your own worth. Honor her by living a life she would be proud of." Andy nodded, though the weight in his heart remained. He realized that forgiveness, both for himself and from Jennifer, would take time, but he was determined to keep trying. Months turned into years, and Andy slowly began to rebuild his life. He immersed himself in his work, finding fulfillment in helping others through the foundation. During one of the foundation's events, he met a woman named Clara, a social worker who shared his passion for making a difference. Clara was warm, kind, and compassionate, qualities that reminded Andy of Jennifer but also set her apart. Their connection was gradual, built on mutual respect and shared values. Andy was hesitant at first, afraid of repeating the mistakes of his past. But Clara's patience and understanding allowed him to open up in ways he hadn't before. As their relationship blossomed, Andy found himself daring to hope for happiness again. Clara became a source of light in his life, a testament to the possibility of second chances. One night, Andy was plagued by a recurring nightmare of the protective spirit he had banished. In the dream, the spirit warned him that his newfound happiness would be short-lived. Terrified, Andy confided in Sophia, who suggested that he seek spiritual guidance to ensure the curse was truly broken. They returned to the elderly woman who had helped them before, seeking her wisdom. The woman performed a cleansing ritual, assuring Andy that the spirit's hold was gone. "The nightmares are remnants of your fear," she explained. "You must let go of the past to fully embrace your future." Andy realized she was right. The spirit no longer had power over him, but his own doubts and insecurities were holding him back. He resolved to confront these inner demons and move forward with courage and hope. Andy channeled his energy into expanding the foundation, creating programs to support women and children in need. He worked closely with Clara, whose dedication and empathy inspired him every day. Together, they launched initiatives that provided education, healthcare, and emotional support to underserved communities. Andy found purpose in his work, knowing that each life he touched was a tribute to Jennifer's memory. The foundation's success brought Andy a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt before. He realized that his journey wasn't just about redemption, it was about creating a legacy that would outlast him. By turning his pain into purpose, he was able to find meaning in even the darkest moments of his life. After years of healing and growth, Andy proposed to Clara in a quiet, heartfelt moment. She said yes, and their wedding was a simple yet beautiful affair, attended by close friends and family. As they exchanged vows, Andy felt a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. He vowed to cherish and honor Clara, determined to be the partner she deserved. Vivian, watching from the front row, couldn't hold back her tears. She was proud of the man her son had become, despite the challenges he had faced. Sophia, too, felt a sense of closure, knowing that Jennifer's love had paved the way for Andy's transformation. The wedding was a celebration of love, resilience, and the power of second chances. Andy stood on the balcony of his home, watching the sun rise with Clara by his side. Life was far from perfect, but it was filled with hope and promise. He had learned to accept his past, cherish the present, and look forward to the future. Jennifer's memory remained a guiding light, inspiring him to be a better man every day. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, Andy whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the lessons, the love, and the second chances he had been given. He knew that the road ahead would have its challenges, but he was ready to face them with courage and grace. For the first time in his life, Andy felt truly free. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this amazing story? Please leave a like and subscribe for more interesting stories. Thanks for watching.